doing business anywhere, gaining trust is the most important. Although I'm good at talking, selling stories, but you need to have something to back them up. So I think building relationship, trust is the most important. But trust is not something you can build overnight. Okay, you can make a great first impression, but I think you need to really persistently show your sincerity, your honesty with your partner. So I think I was able to have great partners in many different ventures, upheld the same principles, and it works every time. And so you also are able to attract also reliable partners by having this kind of attitude. So of course, you need to be selective, right? I mean, not everyone can be your partner, but having great partners is part of the major factor for success.
Welcome to The Wild Show with your hosts, Will Chang, Lee Chang, and Andrew Su. Hi, this is Will Chang, and as always, I have my co-hosts, Lee Chang and Andrew Su with me.
Hey guys, great to be here.
Today, our guest is Tony Zhang, the visionary behind Shanghai's Park 97, a legendary nightclub that redefined Shanghai nightlife and laid the foundation for today's vibrant scene. Last week, I moderated a panel with Tony where we talked about the impact that Park 97 had on the participants who navigated Shanghai's dynamic landscape during the late 90s and 2000s, a period that coincides with China's rise onto the global stage. I wanted to bring Tony on here today to dig a little bit deeper about his experience as an entrepreneur in China. Tony is also the executive director of Phi Skin Medical Group. Phi Skin is a medical investment and management group founded in 2012, currently operating in 7 medical clinics in Shanghai, Beijing, Hangzhou, and Ningbo. The company is dedicated to provide skin and cosmetic beauty enhancements with non-invasive and minimally invasive medical procedures. Welcome, Tony.
Hi, good to meet you.
So I just wanted to set the stage for the audience here to describe what Park 97 is for those that have never visited Park 97 during its heyday and don't know anything about it. On our panel last week, we talked about some of the notable guests that came to visit. Could you just explain a little bit about what Park 97 was and who came to visit?
Okay, well, we first opened Park 97. It was back in 1997. I remember our first soft opening was in October. And we first opened as a sort of a stylish cafe and lounge concept. So it's in a historical park. It was called Fuxing Park now, but it used to be called French Park in Shanghai. It was known to old Shanghainese called French Park. So it's right in front of beautiful rose garden. So we had a pretty lavish sort of surroundings, and we became the first stylish cafe open since 1949. So it became an instant wow. So we had a lot of attention from locals and expats. So that was the first stage, which is between 1997 and 1999. It was a cafe and lounge. And so we had a lot of traffic from celebrities, international travelers. So our names, because we got a lot of media coverage and attention back then because we were sort of unique and stylish. So we did have a lot of celebrities. Steve Liu mentioned about Fei Wang, but I remember that the top singers, Hong Kong and Taiwan, I saw a lot of them. I'm just to name a few, like Guan Zhiling, the 4 pop singers, the male pop singer, I believe Li Ming, I forgot it was his English name, but also Guo Fuchen, all these people from Hong Kong, Taiwan came. Internationally, we had like people like Backstreet Boy and Michael Schumacher's, like businessmen like Steve Wynn from Vegas, Wynn Casinos chairman. And we had like, back then with Prince Albert, now is King Albert of Monaco also came to Park 97. There was a lot of celebrities. In 1998, as I mentioned the story last time, we had Chelsea Clinton came to party with us until midnight, and even came the next morning to see the old people like practicing Tai Chi in Fuxing Park. So we do have a lot of notorieties and became sort of a landmark space for entertainment. And later in 2000, we added a club element. So we became multi sort of function venues from restaurants, cafe, clubs, and it will also have a live music. So it became multi-sections, multi-function space.
So I wanted to bring it back to the beginning and just understand your personal story and how you ended up in Shanghai in the first place. Can you tell us a little bit about your upbringing, your time in the States, and how you ended up back into Shanghai?
I grew up in Shanghai. I was born in Shanghai. Actually, I was born in the neighborhood right around Park 97. So Fuxing Park was always sort of I had a lot of a childhood memory there. So I grew up in that neighborhood. I was very familiar with the area. And I left Shanghai when I was 17, came to the US to finish my high school here. And went to John Marshall, by the way, in Los Angeles, at Griffith Park area. I got an engineering degree from UCLA. So I spent altogether a little over 10 years in the US before I went back to China in the mid 90s. Yeah, so my background was basically, I spent most of my life in China, plus about 10, 11 years of experience in US. I think that 10, 11 years US experience really helped me a lot because in China back then in the 80s was a very different country. People still in mouse suit when I left China, right? So it's very different background. And to me, it was a cultural shock when I first came to US and my English was quite poor. So we had a very little English education when we were in China and not as popular as today, where you have a lot more English speakers today. So to me, it took me some time to make adjustment to the lifestyle here. But LA as a capital of entertainment in the US and world, right? And so I had a lot of influence from LA. So, and especially UCLA, also known for one of the parties. So I remember, although I got an engineering degree, but I love to party. So weekends, I remember I went to, back then, there were popular club like Orange Garden when I was in junior years, and then elevated myself to clubs in Beverly Hills areas. Like I remember there was a club in Beverly Center called Bon La. So I was heavily influenced by these kind of nightlife. So when I went back to China in the mid 90s, it was still China, it was still at the beginning of development. So Shanghai, especially, people were very hungry for Western ideas and always looking for something new. A major factor was there were a lot of expats in Shanghai. All started having a lot of expats because China became really a fast developing area. So just like India or Vietnam today, you got a lot of attention from investors everywhere in the world. And also manufacturings are moving to China. So a lot of activities, a lot of traffic internationally. So people hungry for opportunities, ideas. So it was a very interesting period of time. So I was part of that. Went back to China. We thought, the experience I had in US, whether we can duplicate a success there. So everybody is asking for that kind of questions, right? And the nightlife, they had nightlife, but the standard was low compared to what we experienced in the US back then in comparison. So I thought that we might be able to injecting something new. So that's the whole background before I opened 97.
Tony, can you also speak to, you said you came to the US in your teens, and this was like in the mid 80s, I would assume?
Yes, right before mid 80s. I graduated from high school, 84, 85, I think. Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah. Yes, you're right. Yeah.
Okay. And so, to my understanding, it was pretty rare to be able to have that opportunity. Can you speak to how you were able to come to the States? Was it because of your parents, or through what means were you able to come to continue your education?
Well, my parents immigrated to US in the mid 80s. So yeah, there are very few fresh immigrants from China. So we were among the first group, right? I mean, so because China just opened up like 1979, I remember. Correct. And that was the first year China and US established a relationship and official relationship. So we are able to got into the queue because one of my relatives lived in the US. My mother's brother has been in the US for many years. So he was applying for my mother. So whole family. And so that was the opportunity. And I got a lot of envy. I mean, people really envy me back then because very few people had that opportunity. And I remember when I got to US, I first time saw the freeway. I first time saw supermarkets. To me, everything is the new. So the level of sophistication had a big difference between US and China back then.
Yeah. And your parents, did they find kind of America to be everything that they thought it would be? Did they assimilate decently well?
They were in the medical field. So in China, both my parents are doctors. The most challenging thing is because their English level, so they will not be able to practice medicine here because licensing in the US is very different and they don't recognize the China credentials. So to them was quite a struggle, even for me, because we start from scratch, right? I mean, so unlike the new immigrants today from China, a lot of them are filthy rich. So we had nothing. I remember I only had a few $100s in my pocket. So it was tough. And I also had jobs in the restaurants, started as a dishwasher. So yeah, we went through some hardship. But to me, I think now we look back, actually, was quite good for me. So really hardened my spirit. So all the dirty jobs, making hard money also forced me to started to try to blend in with the society, learn English quickly. So try to support his family. So we started very early thinking about that. And my parents able to find jobs in the medical field, although they didn't really practice medicine, but they're working in medical labs. So I think I remember after second or third year, after my mother started finding jobs, medical related, our lives became more stabilized. So I was able to focus more on studies, able to get into school like UCLA. So my experience in the US really helped my life, whole life, right? I mean, not just the entertainment part, fun part, but also the hard part as well.
Right. And so you were in the States, you had went to college, started to assimilate. So what made you want to go back to China?
Okay, I mentioned I actually got a degree from engineering before and from UCLA. And then after that, I worked briefly in General Motors and also Southern California Gas. And I realized I wasn't so interested in engineering. So then I started doing real estate. So I became actually a real estate broker in the commercial side. I was focusing on industrial properties in Southern California. I was able to find my interest in sales and communication, right? So love to make connections, friends, jobs like in real estate. So I was able to communicate with many different people. So you have fresh new challenges every day, meet different people. And that for a few years. And then I got to know some entrepreneurs in China and through my jobs because I was focusing on industrial properties, city of industries, city of commerce, because China started trading with the US a lot. So you have a lot of warehouses, import exporters, and even tech companies are starting to come in. So I was able to actually got to know some Chinese entrepreneurs. They brought me a lot of exciting stories where China's heading, the directions. There are a lot of opportunities opening up in China, start allowing private enterprise to thrive. So I heard a lot of exciting stories. So actually one of the guys that I got to know actually was through some political friend. I had a friend, Alan Cho. Actually, he is a bro also. He was assistant to Secretary of State of California, March Yu back then in the early 90s. So I became a very good friend with him because I was in real estate, loved to get connections. So he hooked me up to many different people, including Steve Liu from LA Law. And so that was the early 90s before I went back to China. So I was able to start making connections, including connections from China. So when I went back to China for the first time, actually sort of as a social ambassador for a March Yu. So I went back, I got a lot of VIP receptions from local governments to local entrepreneurs. So I was able to see China development firsthand in the mid-90s. So I decided to move back. Actually, it was an invitation from entrepreneur from Southern China. He was producing electronics products in China. So he gave me the whole East China sort of as a rep. So I was excited to take that job and I moved back. I remember I spent the first 2 years in a hotel, booking up 5-star hotels, and he got me a suite and an office. So I got a pretty good setup when I first moved back to China. So I was able to settle my life there at the beginning and started finding opportunity in entertainment because I love to make connections. So I think the whole reason I started interested in a project like Park 97, it was because I think it was a great platform for me to make connections socially. And that was the first motivation.
So let's talk about Park 97 and how you started. So you were working at the time and you saw this opportunity in terms of a boom of investors and expats were coming to China, and there wasn't anything of quality the way that it was like in the United States, in LA specifically. And so how did you go about kind of taking that vision of your party days in LA and basically transforming it into China? Like, what were the first steps you did to start building out Park 97?
Well, I mentioned Steve Liu because Steve Liu, huge connectors. I think he was the factor in LA that also gave me a lot of inspiration because I went to a lot of his party. And then also he took me to a lot of clubs because a lot of his parties happening in major clubs in LA. So I did get a lot of exposure. When I went back to China, I was talking to Steve, including Alan Cho. Alan Cho later moved to China, but I was the one who went back first. So yeah, I did my market research. So before I start this business, and also I had a Hong Kong girlfriend back. So I traveled to Hong Kong a lot and I was able to party at one quite far. So made connection there. And one of the most popular club that I went to was in Hong Kong, actually 97. It was Club 97. it also is a major sort of a base for like Canto Pops, celebrities in Hong Kong. They gather there a lot like that. So yeah, to me, I mean, those are became my first inspirations. So, and the other person I need to mention is this gentleman called Marcus Broccoli, because he was the child bureau chief for Wall Street Journal back then. So he introduced me to a lot of media people. And so he encouraged me actually say, hey, Tony, he said, Shanghai is so boring. You're from LA. You should start something. So yeah, I was incentivized and encouraged by people like that. In entertainment business, it's a very human related business. You need to have players and people. So it's not just money, ideas. Those are the most important element when you start a business, especially from scratch. And so in 1997, I started to get serious because I think that was not only lucrative, but to me, it's a great platform. But of course, I didn't know that actually 97 actually reached beyond my expectation in many different ways. But also the kind of difficulties I ran into, challenges I ran into, also much more than I anticipated. So they go both ways. Yeah.
I want to get into those challenges, but before I get to that, it's interesting because when we talk about Park 97, you started it in 1997. And 1997 is when Hong Kong opened up for the first time, right? Or Hong Kong basically went back to China.
Yes. Okay. Well, let me tell you why we call it Park 97. I remember in March or April of 1997, I happened to get a news that there was open space in the park. So, of course, I went through some connections, was able to secure the space. But even after I secured the space, I didn't know exactly what I was going to do with that space. But my initial idea when I was talking to all these expats in Shanghai is, because a lot of them who were very interested, including the one that you gather materials from, Andy Phil, because he was back in Shanghai doing doing research for his PhD thesis on Shanghai nightlife. So a lot of these expats were very interested in old history of Shanghai. Because Shanghai is very different from other cities in China because he had a heavy Western influence, was the metropolis of Asia, because it was actually even bigger than Tokyo in the 1920s and 30s, because the status of Shanghai has become the sort of melting pot of East and West. And China's a big country, but Shanghai was the one who opened to multiple Western countries. So you have multifaceted sort of influences from France, from US, British. So even Japanese have their concessions there. So you have a very interesting sort of mixed melting pot. And of course, primarily by Chinese, but Westerners are able to make a lot of influence. So if you look at architecture, the culture are very unique. So some of them suggest me that I should do a sort of old Shanghai thing, so to bring back that part of memories. That was my initial idea for the space. But there was a problem because I've never done anything like this before. So, and then I start thinking maybe I should partner with somebody who's more professional, have done this before. So actually Marcus Broccoli was able to connect me with Michelle Garneau. Michelle was another player. She had a very successful restaurant in Hong Kong, into IFC, International Foreign Correspondence, FCC, I think, Foreign Correspondence Club. I don't know any of you are familiar with Hong Kong. It's also very close to Lan Kwai Fong. She had a very successful restaurant there. So very populated with media people, correspondents. And so she also saw Shanghai opportunity. So at the time she was in Shanghai looking for a space for her restaurant. But her concept is more like fine dining, right? So Marcus asked me to talk to her about possibility of partner with her. So she came to look at the space and she thought that space was not exactly what she was looking for. So later she actually opened a very famous restaurant on the run. It's called Emma. Okay, that's a different story. After she came to inspect the place and she was telling me she had a sister was running Club 97 in Lan Kwai Fong. So that got me excited because that was a club that I went to frequently whenever I would visit Hong Kong. So she introduced me to her sister, who was the CEO for Club 97 in Hong Kong. Okay, so I flew to Hong Kong immediately afterwards and met the group. I mentioned about Christian Romberg, Nicole Garneau. They were all major partners. There's a different group. It's called 97 Hong Kong. Okay. So I went there to sell their story. I think, what I learned from US is not just engineering, English, clubs, but I think I learned a lot of the social skill. So I was able to sell the story to them. I was telling them, say, hey, Shanghai now is so happening. So many people came. And then you got a group called 97. You should do something in 1997 to maximize your brand or whatever. So I was able to sell them the story. I'm telling them about the story of the old French part, historically. And so I think a lot of people, especially in Hong Kong, they also think the next opportunity, expats in Hong Kong in 1997, they thought the next opportunity might be in Shanghai. A lot of them are really fantasized about the old Shanghai. And then now I think China just opened up, the opportunity were there. So they actually, the week after I went to Hong Kong, they gathered up partners, like 6 or 7 different partners from Hong Kong. Most of them expats flew to Shanghai, looked at the space. And immediately they made a decision. So we became Park. Since it was in the park, so we called it Park combined with 97, plus we opened in 1997. That's why we call it Park 97. So that was the beginning.
So I know, at least on the panel, you talked about how 2 years in, you faced your first challenge. Could you talk a little bit about that?
First of all, I think from different perspectives. When we first opened, yes, we did had a lot of attentions because we attracted people sort of a top echelon of society, right? I mean, so, and also a lot of JV companies, foreign companies in China, they found that was a deep place to go, for functions, gatherings, social. So we immediately became instant success by bringing traffic. However, I didn't make my money in the first 2 years because the 97 group, they're professionists, right? And they wanted everything to be in their style. So they send in actually a lot of expats to work in the restaurants and a cafe. So our costs were very high because these people, they fly in between Shanghai and Hong Kong. We have to pay them expat package, right? So give them rent their apartments. So at the beginning, although we had a lot of revenues, but as shareholders, we didn't really make a lot of money. And then because it was the position, it was a cafe, and also now. So we noticed when in our first few months were great. And then after probably 8 or 9 months, people start getting bored. So I noticed our business started dwindling down after dinner. Okay. But as you know, in restaurant business, I mean, it's very difficult to make money from food. The profit margin were much better from drinks. But as people only staying for dinner, and they left for drinks. And plus, because we are located in the park, so it was very difficult for us to attract any lunch business. So dinner became our only revenue sources or a major revenue source, right? So I think after second year, I saw that we kind of didn't break even. So our first challenge, which actually from financial perspective, we ran out of money after like 20 some odd months, I think. So that was my first challenge. So I remember Christian Rumber told me that we only had like a few weeks of cash flow remained. So I had to actually borrow money and also bring in new investors, bring some new shareholders at the time just to try to rescue, to buy some time. I remember putting some of my personal money savings, bought myself maybe 2 or 3 months of extra time. And so, but I was lucky in 1999. I got to know a gentleman called Alan Zeman. So he was you can look up doing some research. He's the king of non-pipe. He's like father. They call it father of non-pipe. He's well known in Hong Kong, Alan Zeman. He's Jewish, obviously. And he went to Hong Kong with nothing and became billionaire. So I got to know him actually at 97 when he visited Shanghai in 1999. I remember, we had a very good exchanges and he was giving me a business card saying, hey, Tony, if you in the future, if you have ever had any needs, please give me a call. So a few months later, I ran into problems. So I was able to give him a call, asking for advice, for guidance. So he was very generous and to help me say, hey, Tony, if you're interested, maybe we can become partner. So actually, it happened that he was invited by Xintiandi people. And Xintiandi, I don't know whether you've been to Shanghai, it was a major attraction, right? I mean, it's a major development in Shanghai. They try to duplicate the success with Lan Kuei-Fang in Hong Kong. So they invited father of Lan Kuei-Fang, which Alan Zeman, to Shanghai in 1999. So I happened to got to know him because he was invited to the Xintiandi project. But Zeman is more interested in doing something so he could have more say. So when I offered him an opportunity, said whether he's interested in partnering with 97 to help me with the project, he's more than happy to accept it. He thought that was a great opportunity for him also to get into China, right? So yeah, everything happened clicks and it happened at the right time. So timing, I think if I want to offer any advice to entrepreneurs, sometimes you have a great idea, even a great group of people together, but if you have a bad timing also, pretty, you're not going to get you anywhere. But you have to have all the elements together, right? I mean, so it just happened to me that I was lucky, first of all. Second, it was everything happened in right timing. So he actually immediately came to Shanghai, looked at the site, offered me some great advice. So after he making his investment, he bought a lot of these old shareholders out. So he and I became major partners. So we're able to turn it around with some of the great concepts that he add on. So first of all, he thinks I should add a club element. So in 97, and so that's why California Club, we added to a part of so we turned part of the restaurant area into a club. And secondly, he changed my bar position. So he thinks the old design make the energy low. So he actually moved the bar to the windows, the drinks, and to enjoy the scenes from the par. So, I mean, he made a lot of subtle changes, but make a big difference. So instantly, after 2000, become a cash cow. So I think that's a turnaround story. But many times, I tell you, in my lifetime, a lot of my business, even including my existing business, we had a similar situation like this. So I think persistency is very important. You need to really be resilient in the business when you're having challenge like this. Of course, we have other challenges. For instance, I think because we were too avant-garde, so we had some drag queen performances. We got police attention. That's a separate story. I mean, so I'm just telling you, you're going to face numerous challenges, including financially, even you need to deal with fights. Right. I mean, people after a few drinks, they're not being rational. So issues like this. So we met many different challenges. I think that's all separate issue. So today's topic is more entrepreneurship. So I want to focus more on entrepreneurship.
I did a lot of research before this interview. You've been written about Park 97, like CNN wrote a piece on Park 97 and on you. You mentioned Andrew Field. He wrote a academic paper on Park 97 and the history of Shanghai nightclubs. And in that paper, he actually wrote that between 2000 and 2005, Park 97 was the most lucrative club in Shanghai. And it sounds like it's really thanks to the Long Kai Feng Group and the subtle changes that your partner made. One of the questions I had is like, I imagine at this point in time, you're still fairly young. You're probably in your 30s. And these guys are billionaires, or these guys have so much experience as well as they have a lot of status, right? And so how do you actually go about building the relationships and becoming partners with these types of people?
I think you need to be very sincere. I think my style, doing business anywhere, gaining trust is the most important. Although I'm good at talking, selling stories, but you need to have something to back them up. So I think building relationship, trust is the most important. But trust is not something you can build overnight. Okay, you can make a great first impression, but I think you need to really persistently show your sincerity, your honesty with your partner. So I think I was able to have great partners in many different ventures, upheld the same principles, and it works every time. And so you also are able to attract also reliable partners by having this kind of attitude. So of course, you need to be selective, right? I mean, not everyone can be your partner. But having great partners is part of the major factor for success.
One thing about running a nightclub is it's really all about perception and exclusivity and feeling like if you come to the nightclub, you're special, right? How did you create that brand and that perception? You mentioned a lot of people coming to Park 97. Could you just explain what that process was like to basically build that brand perception around Park 97?
Well, first of all, you got to have the right vibe. I think for any clubs, especially for these seasoned clubbers. So if you don't have the right music, right lightings, right crowd, they're not going to go. So I think although the first group of a partner, we didn't make the money, but I have to say, those are very stylish and trendy people. They really brought in the style that made 97 different from the other clubs. So at the beginning, our brand had the right positioning. And later, Miss Zeman brought in he was able to blend in great business skills into the platforms that made us profitable, right? So, but when we first started brand, I think we started right, had a very great position that distinguished ourselves from the rest of the crowd. So once we are being placed on the map, you got a lot of notorieties, attentions, and globally, because I have partners from media, so they'll have a lot of friends they brought in, so they're able to get to know us and write about the great stories that propel the brand. Also, place like this, you need to have something. I think my contribution to the club, not only I was the major local partners, so I need to deal with a lot of local issues, a lot of complicated local issues, but also because I was there every day almost. So I was able to giving a lot of attention to these VIPs, right? And so you need to have people there, make them feel they know the boss, they have the privilege. Club is very important, so you need to make these VIP feel that they're VIP. And also I was surrounded by professionals that sees it from different places. For instance, our manager, a lot of them, of course, Zeman or even the first 97 group people, because they had a great connection with resources with professional restaurant operators and managers. So they know how to select these people. So they're able to deliver the services to the customer which they feel they're inclusive, right? So yeah, so it's a combination of many different factors.
How do you go about making someone feel VIP? Like if you wanted to establish kind of like an experience for somebody that is coming in, like what do you think about and what is the process and approach like?
I cannot credit everything just to myself because I think that our management team did a great contribution by really treating the customer well. And a lot of them able to attract these customers continuing coming back from spending money. But me, because I had 97 people knew that I was behind 97. So a lot of people, because it was very popular, so if they cannot have table, they call me. So I'll probably try to maneuver with, so management usually will try to keep a few tables open to meet that kind of demand. So I were able to offer these tables to the most important person I feel, is appropriate for the evening. So sometimes I think in a club, you're not getting to the table. Well, of course, the big spenders you need to pay attention to, but also the right people is very important. Sometimes you're not just giving to the table to the biggest spender, or they just spend money. It's not enough, but you have to have the right people, beautiful people. So the vibe is consistent, not just the lighting, music, but also who are there, right? Who are there. So that's why we give usually the tables that are exposed to traffic to the right crowd. Okay, so there are a lot of nitty gritty details like this you need to manage. So to maintain the status quo.
You also talked about dealing with a lot of local issues, and you mentioned getting in trouble for being too avant-garde when it comes to having drag queen performances and things like that. Could you just go into a little bit about dealing with local issues?
Well, I think there's a cultural difference also because primarily the kind of concept we bring in is very foreign, right? But I remember the Park 97 logo. Actually, on the logo, there's actually a very stylish lady wearing like Shanghai Tan sort of an outfit. So that's very Chinese. But the kind of the style we bring in is sort of very mixed with East and West. Even our design, we call it Art Deco, but modern Art Deco, with a lot of elements actually from old Shanghai. Although our club position, our restaurant, our cafe, our club positioning were never old Shanghai, but we brought in some of these elements to mix it, right? So our position is cross-culture. So to local people, especially to government people, initially they were not so much understanding what we're doing. So they're very cautious. They watch you with very cautious eye, especially from government perspective. But after they learn that we are able to attract a lot of international attention, and they start to accept us. So it took a lot of time to convince them we're here. We actually made a better name for Shanghai. We were able to attract a lot of international tourists, business executives, and help the Shanghai economy. So, and it took me a few years to really make them thought we're there actually was good for Shanghai. And then we became a sort of model for it. I remember police almost cracked down on us right after this drag queen performance. But later, because after Clinton's visit, after Chelsea Clinton came to our club, because the government people think, wow, it's good for China-US relationship, right? So they really give us a lot of a green light. So, and they thought, oh, wow, it's a great place to attract international journalists. So they really want to present Shanghai in a good place. So they now knew that actually we helped the city. It took a lot of communication to make them accept you. So I could go into a lot of details and share a lot of stories, but I think you probably can get a feel of it.
I do want to ask for some stories. Do you have any stories that you can just share in terms of, I just want to understand what it is like running a nightclub in Shanghai, right? What is that process like? I'm sure there's probably a lot of differences when it comes to running a club elsewhere. And so I'm just curious, could you just share a little bit more about what that was like and some stories?
Well, I mean, okay, so a lot of people think nightlife business probably would be associated with gangsters, mafia, but in Shanghai, it wasn't the case because our position was quite high. And Shanghai was actually it's a quite safe city. We didn't have like issues like mafia. So I think the only challenge is you need to make sure the government, the police, you're on the good side of them. So it took me some time, like I said. And I remember that we hired security guards actually through government introduction. They'll make them feel more secure. So if we will hire our own security, we will not probably achieve the same effect. Even hire a retired sort of a local police officers as my advisor to charge of the security. That helped bridge the gap. So we have understanding from both sides. A certain line we cannot cross. And also, if there's things happen, we know how to handle it properly. And in China, face is very important. You got to make sure that you save faces for all sides when we're dealing with many issues. So luckily, we were quite smooth after 1 year or two. And so not only we could go about doing our business, and we also made a great relationship with the government, made our customers happy. Everybody's happy. I remember one night, there was a fight broke out in California. And because I was renting a space in the park, actually, I lived in the park for a few years. And so my manager had to knock on my door, climbing my wall, come in, and because I couldn't hear because maybe I was sleeping or whatever. So they actually woke me up in the middle of the night to handle the fight issue. And actually, you need to really go through issues like this. Sometimes bad things happen, but bad things might result in something good. So when you run into an issue like this and you try to resolve it, and then you get to know people and you know how to prevent it happening for the next time. So a lot of these kind of stories, a lot of these experiences that we accumulated over the years to know what kind of right things and what do we need to do. So I think it makes smooth and smooth. And I didn't really remember any major issue ever came up after the first few years. So it's a learning experience.
So you ran Park 97 for almost a decade, starting from 97, and it coincided with the opening up with China and China's rise onto the global stage. I remember when I was young, I didn't really know how big China was. And my parents would tell me about how important China was going to be. I didn't believe them because I grew up in New Hampshire and I didn't really see that many Chinese people. But it wasn't until 2008 when I saw the Chinese Olympics and I saw how amazing the China Olympics were. I became first really proud of being Chinese and understanding China is now on the map and a real powerful country. Could you just talk a little bit about kind of the evolution of China as you were going through your entrepreneurial journey of Park 97, just how that coincided with the rise of China?
I think it's very difficult to repeat the same experience now because I think we really did this project in the right time, with the right people. As I mentioned before, I think timing was everything because China was on the rise. And I think China also opened up to the rest of the world with open arm. And they're like sponge and like to absorb all the good things from the West. So it was a very special period. And one day we're able to write some story about it. It was a time in the mid-90s. Shanghai is just about to take off. And also because the special culture in Shanghai where East meets West. So I think the kind of spark that created in that special place became a major element of our success because it's cross-culture, first of all. Second, there are a lot of cultural conflict. For instance, China got out of the Cultural Revolution. So there's market opening, conflicting with the ideology from cultural revolutions. Also, East meets the West, old Shanghai versus new Shanghai, local versus foreigners. So there are a lot of these conflicts, but made it very interesting. Also, another interesting aspect is I don't remember everywhere else could have the same thing, but because that was a special time. So we're able to mix with people from all walks of the world into one place where other clubs in any countries really well positioned. You don't see King Albert go to a club where maybe on a different section of the place, you have totally different crowds. Actually, at the later years, I remember after 2002 or so, I think our second floor became a little bit more VIP than the first floor. So first floor is like mixed with everything. People love to party, they come in. And second floor, they're more VIP, exclusive. But I remember these VIP, one of the reasons these people are happy to come to our places because they can see different scenes. They can find their own secure place on the second floor, but they can walk around in the first floor, which is like a wild animal park, right? So that kind of a mix also quite interesting, made it very interesting. It's one of the things that I feel proud of this. So we have people from all different levels able to come under one roof.
It's actually kind of surprising. I know you kind of went into the fact that there are no triads. So really the only kind of authority you have to placate or make good with is the government, right? And it sounds like you guys had a pretty good relationship that built over time, obviously, but that in fact, you guys didn't sound like you had a local partner per se, or like somebody that perhaps was son of official or somebody that had that type of influence. Was it something that just naturally, because of the experience and the success that you were able to build that relationship and trust with the, I guess, the government side?
Well, yeah, I can guarantee that there's no partners. They're like some of any officials, so we didn't have that kind of problem. But a lot of these people, a lot of officials, the second generations, third generations, they were our customers. So I think once these people became our customers, automatically we feel pretty secure.
Right,
No,
right.
we didn't have to have them as a partner, just offering services, right? So, but we're able to offer services to that level of people. Also, I remember late 90s was the internet in China. So I got to know a lot of these internet founders like Charles from Sohu. We have NetEase, James Ding. They're all frequent visitor of Park 97. I can name many of them. But then, yeah, I mean, also for venture capitalists, for VCs, because that's where they entertain their clients in sourcing their deals. So we became a hub for people like that kind of level. Now, that made Park 97 position very unique. It's not just clubbing, but it becomes a social hub. So people entertain. So whenever these people have overseas clients coming over, they will entertain them there. So we made a very good impression. That's why I said, I think if I want to gather stories, if any of these people are willing to contribute a piece of memories there, that would make that story very interesting. Maybe in the future we can have a book about it. And then that would be very interesting because we did have a lot of the international celebrities, local move and shakers that had experience there.
Yeah, probably business deals were done in those VIP rooms that perhaps you wouldn't know about. Actually, one more curious question. So when Will and I first got to Beijing, and this was already 2011, I remember we went out with a bunch of friends to a very local bar in Wudaoko. And I remember distinctly waking up in the middle of the night, cold sweat, stomach pains. And then we were told that we had to be very careful where we went because essentially, if not 95% of the bars and clubs had fake alcohol. So I'm very curious with Park 97 at the time, was it always carrying like exclusive, very like international brands and drink? Was that ever an issue with your supply for alcohol or any sort of offerings that you guys had?
Well, because I think those kind of revenues are regenerating. I think there was no reason, especially the kind of a customer we're serving to. It will be a much bigger risk for us to sell fake alcohol. So we were being very careful about this. I cannot say 100% because in China, you never know from the supply end whether they mix with anything there. But I think we actually made a big effort to try to avoid it. And we even work with suppliers recycling these bottles back just to make sure that whatever we serve are genuine, and we try to avoid that counterfeiters will be able to get the bottles that we consumed back to serve their own purpose. So we did actually purposely try to avoid things like this from happening. But I'm sure it was a rampant issue for that period of time. But I think we did our best job trying to avoid that.
Yeah, that makes total sense because I think I remember distinctly when all the expats in Beijing, our friends, we found out the clubs, the restaurants that served real alcohol, that's where we would all go, right? Because that's where we felt safe and wanted to spend the money. But the reputation is very important. And so I think that is kind of how you build that rapport or trust with your clientele.
Exactly. Yeah. And all customer has expensive taste. If you have a fake alcohol, some people, they're able to tell. Now our reputation is totally ruined.
Right.
All right. So you've mentioned that you wanted to use Park 97, the creation of Park 97 as a platform to build connections. And obviously, based on everything we've heard, you've done that very successfully. I wanted to understand or know like how you think about building your network and your approach, and how can somebody like me not replicate, but at least use your approach or think about things from your approach or your thought process.
Yeah. I think when I first started in 97, of course, I was young, single, and my instinct just tell me, if I have a club, it's easy to get to know the girls. I mean, just like everybody else, right? But then, of course, I knew that I didn't know. Beginning, I was just thought that I was just going to start a bar, just get to know people. But of course, I made a right choice by partnering with people not only seasoned experience, but also has certain status. I think I have to say, I didn't really start Park 97 from scratch, from unknown, but was able to build on some of the credibility I think my partners already built in Hong Kong. I have to credit that. And of course, with special backdrop of Shanghai and that special period that made our success, right? So after we were able to attract so many interesting people, that instantly also gave me a lot of inspiration to continue my journey of entrepreneurship. For instance, it was 97 in 1999 because I knew everybody was doing internet. So actually I did. I launched the internet concept. I mean, Steve Liu will probably share you also a lot of experience that he did also many different projects. I tried it myself too. In 1999, I had actually a concept very similar to today's Dianping but I was modeled after a US concept called City Search. Okay, if you look up, that concept later failed, it disappeared. But City Search was very similar to Yelp today, but it's in a 1.0 version. So you're able to look up entertainment information, restaurants in different cities. So I think I was trying to combine the Continent's travelers' ideas, the City Search all into one. So I did launch a platform like this, and I was able to raise some money actually from some of the customers from 97. So that project failed after the internet bubble went busted in early 2000. So simultaneously, if you look up, actually I had a website called ChinaNow.com back then. It was doing something like this. So that was a typical case when you have the right idea. Later, somebody pick it up. Like maybe we had successful stories like Dianping or whatever, but I just started too early and it was too little money. So there's a lot of lessons learned, but it helped me when you have the idea, you have the right social platforms, you have the right connections and people believe in you, they will invest with you. But then later, you're probably going to take me what I'm doing now, which is PhiSkin. Actually, my initial angel investors are my customers from 97. You and my today's partner, who's now running PhiSkin in China, he was my frequent customer. Before I sold 97, he actually stayed in Park 97 drinking longer than the time I spent in 97. So anyway, so story like this, if you ask me, my motivation initially was just want to have fun. Of course, it became more of a social platform for me, not only having fun, but I got to know a lot of interesting people and sharing a lot of interesting ideas and helped me continue on as a serial entrepreneur. So even my Aaron investor, who's also a bro, he was also a frequent visitor of 97 at the current PhiSkin project. So yeah, more than that, I think we built a really great friendships with many friends from all around the world. I think at the end of the day, nobody's going to go away this world with any wealth, but the memories, the friendship that you build throughout your lifetime, the experience, I think those are the most valuable or something that you can be proud of.
Let's talk about Phi Skin. What is it and how did you start it?
Okay. After I opened in 97, in 1999, I have a friend, a dermatologist who had business in Los Angeles. Actually, he opened his first clinic in Beverly Hills. Before that, he actually worked for a Jewish group. It's called like Laser Clinic, the Laser Center of California, or whatever. I forgot the name. But anyway, he was the one who inspired me at the beginning when I was still running the club. So he invited me to his opening in Beverly Hills in his first laser clinic. So that planted a seed with me. So I got to know, my parents are doctors, but they were treating diseases, right? I mean, so I didn't know that medicine can help people become more beautiful. So that was the first idea I got from this guy. And then later, I think he visited Shanghai. He came to my club. He looked at the patrons from 97. He was telling me, he said, look, Tony, he said, you bypass millions of dollars. He said, look at these customers. They're the primary target. He actually encouraged me to do something similar in China. But that was in the early 2000s, I remember. Nobody ever heard of medical aesthetics in China. So it was very early. And China still had a lot of women that don't do makeups. So to me, I thought that probably the market needs some time to be mature. So I didn't also, because 97 was so lucrative that I didn't even bother, right, to think to venture something different. But I think towards 07, 08, I stopped thinking changing my career, especially after I've been single for so many years by associated business with club. I thought I want to change my lifestyle. I want to change, maybe start something new with daytime job. So I was so famous as sort of nightmare. I want to venture towards a daytime concept. So I thought maybe maybe just medical aesthetic will be a perfect match. First, because my parents really regretted me that studied engineer and then became a club owner, right? They thought I did not continue studying medicine. That was a lifetime regret. I want to make up by saying, now I start managing doctors. I got something medical related. That's first thing that came to my mind. Second, I got the customers, which were clubbing in my place for 10 years, and everybody needs some fix, right? So I thought that naturally I should offer something to serve their lifetime needs. So I started doing research. That's how I met my partner today, because he came to drink in my place. Of course, I was introduced by some government people at the beginning at the dinner, and then he became my regular customers. And he was actually the director, business development director for Allergan. Allergan is a major medical aesthetic supplier based out of Irvine. Right? And they were launching the product called Botox in 2009. They just got their license and permit from CFDA, was China FDA. Yeah. So yeah, Ken. So after I got to know Ken, I said, hey, what would we doing a clinic together and look at the customer that I got, the customer base, right? So naturally we moved to the next thing. So we were able to start gathering the first round of funds again through my first customer in 97. Actually, this guy is very interesting. Philip Shaw. He was my angel investor, and he actually had a pharmaceutical company focusing on dermatology. And he was among the first group of customers that came to 97 in 1997, because he was working for a major pharmaceutical company. I don't know which one. Script, I think. And his office is right across the park. So he came to lunch, he came to club, came to dinner. So he was my regular customer back then. And after I talked to him, he just became my first angel investor. So that helps, right? I mean, so at the time when I was in 97, I never knew that I was going to get into medical aesthetics. It later paid off. So yeah, if you ask me how I started, that's the natural progression. I moved to the second stage of my life. And so I was able, of course, 2009, I sold the place to Muse Group. Muse is actually also interesting because they were in Pasadena. Michael's son, who I think partnered with Tina, somebody was telling me at the time that I was doing the panel, right? I mean, so they had Muse in bars in Pasadena. And this guy, because he visited Shanghai between 03 and 04, and then he saw we made so much money. So he tried to come to China to do something similar. So, and then he became actually very successful. So actually, entertainment businesses usually have lifespan. And plus, I think I got old and, I ran out of energy and with the same business, right? So to me, I needed something fresh and new, but he came in and he actually did well and opened the first Muse club and it got a lot of our customers, even took away our managers. And we're good friends, right? And so we sold it to him. And he helped me also, right? At the time, I need to get married and settle. So he helped me. He adopted the 97 in 09. So right after I sold a 90 majority share to him, but I maintained the shareholders there until later. So I was able to actually sold it to him and then got married at the following year. So
One of the things I wanted to ask you about was the beauty standards of China versus the West. And are there any differences in terms of localization and aesthetics that you need to consider to build out this new business?
Well, yes. First of all, I think especially dermatology, in the field of dermatology, I think there's a big difference between different race. Asians, Caucasians, Americans, they all have different needs. For instance, Asia, the beauty standard, I mean, people they all want to look white. The Western people, they all want to get suntan. So you always try to pursue something which you don't have. And also the skin texture is very different. The way they're responding to laser treatments are very different. So yeah, that's why I always think even when we start our own practice, we cannot adopt the total standard that built by the West. And most of the equipment nowadays as manufactured either Israeli technologies or US energy device companies, whatever. But the kind of protocols they built, they are usually based on Caucasian people. So we have to tweak it ourselves. So we need to do a lot of clinical experiment ourselves to change these protocols. So, but China over the past 10 years, and I was lucky, I got into this business relatively early. Back then, medical aesthetic in China was mostly plastic surgery rather than skin focus. So we are among the first group of companies that are focusing more from a skin perspective rather than just plastic surgery. So 80% of our doctors, physicians were dermatologists versus plastic surgeon. So we're able to scale the business a bit more because we can build certain standard to it. Where plastic surgery is very difficult to build standard, right? Because each doctors do approach things differently. But China, I have to say, even today, of course, I'm on reversing trend, but in the past, they tried to model. Okay, it's very Chinese thinking because it's just like education in China is the same. They tried to educate everybody to be the same standard. Okay, so there was a pretty bad trend before where everybody will look at, we call it Wang Honglian, which is that everybody want to become KOL because now they all have this, we call it Wang Honglian, KOL face. So they only go for one beauty standard. So no matter plastic surgeon or the physician doing injectable, they all try to make the faces into one standard. So everybody look alike, which is a really bad beauty standard, I think. So I think we, at the beginning, the way we differentiate our brands is to make sure that that every plan we design for people are unique to this person rather than say we build everybody into the same face. So when people walk in and say, I want to become this, they are not our customers. Our customers, our positions, people wants to make themselves better rather than become another person. Okay, so better and younger. Okay, so that's why most of our customers are in their 30s and 40s. They're the biggest contributors. Of course, now they're younger and younger generation get into medical aesthetics very early. But still, our primary contributors are people in their 30s and 40s. They have some spending power. And most of them, they don't want to look like other people. They want to just bring the youthful look, bring back the youthful look, or just to make some small adjustment to make themselves look better, right? We're able to attract pretty decent customer group. So gradually over the years, we open one after another and become more profitable.
So Shanghai is pretty obvious in terms of the market there, from bringing in your Park 97 customers to how Shanghai is kind of the international city and the gateway to the West. I was wondering if, as you're expanding into Beijing and Hangzhou and Ningbo, are the cultural and aesthetic differences, or are there cultural and aesthetic differences that they're looking for, or is there a different way that you had to market or bring in people?
Yeah, each city has its own uniqueness, but I will have to say 70-80% in common. It's really not too much difference between cities because the kind of customer we try to target and normally more internationally exposed. Okay, they're primarily locals. They're not expats. And because today in China, I think the biggest consumers are not expats. And when we started in 97, yes, because people, returnees, the expats, they're major consumption force because a lot of local people didn't have enough money. But today is very different. On the reverse side, normally foreigners in China, they're much poorer than the locals. So yeah, the local consumers are still, but I think the most common things that our customers share is they're more internationally exposed. So they respect kind of the approach that we have. We respect personalities, and we always try to make sure that we're using the right products, which are authentic, same as in the alcohol business. So even there are a lot of fake products in our beauty business, right? So genuine, authentic. So gaining customer trust. Those customers more intelligent, much better educated. So they usually did their own research before they come in to see us. So you need to have actually very credible way to approach them. If you say something which they think that you're bullshitting, then you instantly lose the credibility and trust. So those customers are very difficult to please. But once they're happy, they're very loyal. Okay. So it's the same position. So every city we go to, no matter Beijing, Hangzhou, Shanghai, it's not just Shanghai opening to the West. You went to Beijing, you know. There are a lot of the returnees, a lot of locals are pretty well Western exposed or internationally exposed, I have to say. So well educated, especially major city. But for us, it will be very difficult for us to go to the second tier city. But I think we're the first tier. We're very safe. No matter Beijing, Shanghai, Shenzhen, or Hangzhou, they're considered the customer are quite sophisticated. So enough to feed our business with that kind of position. So I don't see that much difference. But culturally, there's some difference. Beijing consumers, once you please them, they're willing to spend. They can spend whatever cost to get what they need. Okay. But Shanghai consumers are different. Even they're rich. They're much more calculated. They pursue more value for the money. So there's a culture difference among different cities. but not necessarily. I think the way we approach them about the same, gaining their trust, show their our professionalism. But I think the way the spending habits are a bit different.
Yeah, it's so fascinating. I feel like it's funny that you were talking about how it just does seem like such a natural kind of progression, if you will. Like so many of your clients at Park 97 could potentially become clients now for all of the clinics for PhiSkin. And I was thinking that a lot of the management skills, marketing, sales, and giving that experience prior to Park 97 should also translate to these clinics as well.
Yes. But nowadays, there is big differences. We didn't have online. There's so many social medias, right? I mean, so when we started in 1997, the internet was still very, very new and young. I remember I was using internet in the late 80s, actually, in a US university, there was internet, but only limited to inter-college communications. And the commercializations of internet was not until, even in the US, not until mid-90s. So China caught that wave in the late 90s. There were a lot of investment going in. So social media was like more Web 2.0, right? I mean, so after Facebook launched, everybody, so I didn't use WeChat until 2011. So I regretted that we didn't have that tool before. But today, the landscape is very different. So we cannot apply just our own knowledge to the new market, because I think even the Park 97, I'm sorry, Phi Skin today, the kind of way that we do our marketing are very different from the time that we did in the Park 97, because the social media factors. We need to hire much younger people because they're the one that play this kind of tools on a daily basis, and they know how to touch the audience in today's world, right? So yeah, we need to be progressive also, right? We cannot just use our own knowledge. But I think a lot of principle can be shared, applies to all businesses. But certain things, the techniques, you need to be progressively upgraded. So for instance, on marketing today, we use a lot of social medias, Xiaohongshu. There are a lot of different touch points now. TikTok, China was called Douyin, right? So yeah, WeChat certainly. Today, actually, even our management, we build around WeChat. The whole management system we build on WeChat. So we can touch the customer with WeChat, and also we can manage our staff with WeChat. There's actually a separate app called WeCom. WeCom is also part of Tencent company, but they primarily serving business, right? But they also can be connected to WeChat. So it made a perfect tool for us. So we have two things can interface with each other, managing internally. Also, we can manage our customers. So yeah, I have to say that now we have to use now more up-to-date techniques to do our marketing.
It's funny you mentioned like the Wanglian. I still feel like, I guess because China, there's such a high population, but a lot of what I see on Douyin still, or, Xiaohongshu, like there's still a lot of the aesthetics that look quite similar, but that might be a good thing because there's just that much demand for services for you guys. I'm curious, Tony, what are some trends that you're seeing in like demand for skincare? Like what is something that perhaps is currently very high in demand from your customers that is perhaps a little bit surprising to you?
Well, I think one thing that surprised to me is the speed, the acceptance to medical aesthetics. So because 10 years ago, we have to go out and educate consumers. Now we're entering a phase actually consumer educating us. So in a way that the knowledge they have and the kind of needs they have. So we have to actually catch up with them in order to serve them. So thanks to social media, because there are a lot of informations being flowed. Also, there are a lot of misinformation. We also have to fight with a lot of these misinformations. So if you ask me what kind of trends, I think surgery was big 10 years ago, become less and less. And because now people think the non-surgical approach, or we call it non-invasive or minimal invasive approach, not even safer, but also it can make the beauty more natural. So I think that's a major trend. That was a trend we caught before, because at the time we launched our platforms, the reason we call it Phi Skin. Okay, let me explain a little bit about the brand. Phi, because Ken, my partner, was telling me that the beauty philosophy, the elegant used for doing injection was based on a Greek philosophy of, they call it golden ratio. Okay, golden ratio. So I was looking up and I saw there was a Greek letter phi representing golden ratio. So I told Ken, I said, we should use phi as our logo. And then because differentiate ourselves from the rest of the players, because we want to use sort of a more dermatology approach to beauty. So we add a skin to it. So that's why we call Phi Skin. So in our blood, we are actually based our business on non-invasive, minimal invasive. So that's our selling point. Okay, so we're able to touch the audience that they're more pursuing anti-aging rather than change their total look. And that way, actually, we avoid ourselves from practicing more risky procedures. And secondly, consumer recurrence are much better, right? Because a lot of these treatments cannot be done by one time. They need to be multiple treatments to achieve better results. So we're able to see our consumers on a much more frequent basis. And also stuff like Botox or HA fillers, they can be absorbed. So they have to come back. Our business can be extended into many different years rather than just one-time things, one-shot things. So I think it's a great business model if we can do things properly.
Tony, your entrepreneurial journey in China was incredibly inspiring. And now that you're back in the US, what are you working on?
Okay, now I just fit out my house, try to get everything settled. I'm not being too ambitious at the beginning because I think the market is different. Second, I think the lesson I learned from coming to US, everything is very slow. So I sort of get used to the pace. So I can't use the same kind of, in China, everything's hustle and bustling. It needs to be quick. And sometimes you need to have a lot of patience in the US. And because market are very different, although I was educated in the US, but I've been away for so many years. So I think at my age, I need to be a little bit more cautious about getting into anything new. And the young, you can repeatedly doing something. You can repeatedly doing failures and success. But in my age, stability is a bit more important, right? And so I cannot afford to jump on something too quickly without knowing them. So I do see opportunities. I got to know some bros and they're very successful here. Some of them are running clinics. They're physicians, right? Some laser clinics. I have dermatology friends here that are running clinics. I could see some opportunities. I think the experience accumulated in China, hopefully one day, it can probably contribute to my new ventures in the US. But I don't want to be rushed to decision because I think that's something that I'm still learning. Even the medical aesthetics I started in China, it took me 2 years to do market research. I did not start as a business right after Park 97. And there is a 2-year gap in between that allowed me to get to, because it was across such a different field, right? It's very different. Although our consumers are overlapped, business natures are very different. So I actually spent 2 years did market research and I fly with doctors to different cities to see how they do. Even they have these multi-level marketing schemes in China that lure VIP customer to events to sell them hundreds of thousands of dollars in packages. So I even pretend to be one of the spa owners' husbands to did a stint to the event like this to try to learn what they do and what they did. So yeah, I don't want to rush to anything at this moment, but I want to build contact first, get to know the market first, and before I start something. Ideally, I like to work with younger people. At my age, I don't have the same kind of energy I had 20, 30 years ago, and I cannot do the same thing as young people. But my knowledge and experience are valuable. I'm willing to pass it on to people, willing to maybe help the younger entrepreneurs to realize their dreams. That's probably more valuable to me rather than just making money myself, right? So if I can help other people making money while I'm benefited, that'll be great. So yeah, I'm waiting for opportunity like this. Nothing set at this moment.
That's amazing. But also, while you're waiting for the opportunity, I know you have a personal project that you're working on, right? Around Park 97?
Yeah, because that's kind of the legacy issues. So yeah, we didn't have social media. So I thought social media is such a great platform and to connect people. The only best way to get to know people was through offline way when I started in 1997. But today is very different because now you have Facebook, Instagram, you have TikTok, you have so many different ways to get to know people from all over the world. But then I had an idea when I was doing Phi Skin, but I didn't have the time. I thought maybe people like that to my age or the old 97 patrons at this moment, there are a lot of them, their experience, the stories are the one that a lot of people are willing to probably remember and share, right? So maybe I should do something on the social media platforms to try to gather stories because a lot of people ask me to maybe write a book about it. But first of all, I didn't have that skill to write a book and I didn't do diaries to document everything. But one thing I think I'm good at it is to connect people. So maybe if I should start something on social media, because a lot of people left Shanghai and now scattering all over the world. And if I can gather these people into one platform to share their experience, their stories, the memories, even photos, because we didn't have digital camera then. And so we can put all the pieces together back and then maybe have a book collectively written by people from all parts of the world. That would be more interesting than some authors writing a book just from one perspective, or someone interviewing me just from one perspective. I think that's probably an interesting project to look at it. I need people like you to help out. You're young, energetic, and then you know how to get it done. So yeah, maybe that's something that we can talk about later.
Yeah, that sounds great to me. And so for the people that are listening today, the ones that have visited Park 97 or have stories from Park 97, how do people find you to send you their stories to you or photos to you?
Some people send it to me because we have long lost friends. So I know that we got connected through Facebook or WeChat. And then people will call me and say, hey, Tony, you know what? What I did in 97 was this and that, like Travis, right? I mean, so he was telling me he had a son, 97 baby. And some people got divorced and find somebody else. A story like this. So I thought fascinating. I found it very fascinating. A lot of story I didn't even know until I reconnect with them like many years later. So if there is a place for them to share, of course, not mediocre things like this, but maybe you can put it in the context of cultures, and even reflect back and I think 90s and early 2000, it was very unique to China. And I don't know, many years later, when we reflected back, I think it was most important because China was transitioned from such a backward country into now at least the second place in the world. We're able to compete globally, right? But that all started with that period of time. But I'm still a big believer China should be continuing to open to the rest of the world. I think we can see that China's so much progress that China made. It's not because China was a closed country. It's because China opened to the ideas, open to the rest of the world. So I still personally willing to see China continue its openness. So I mean, by gathering the people from their period, sharing thoughts together might be an interesting idea.
So for the audience listening that does want to share a story, you can email Tony in the email shared in the show notes. And Tony, thank you so much for being generous with your time. Your story is incredibly inspiring, and I really appreciate you spending the time with us today.
Thank you so much. I hope whatever the experience we had, we can pass on to your generations. You guys could do a much better job and have a more interesting journey than I have. Yeah.
Thank you, Tony.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for listening until the end. If you've enjoyed this episode, please leave us a review on Spotify or Apple Podcasts. It'll help more people like you find us. You can find more about us on wild.show, WLD.SHOW. Please subscribe to our newsletter or DM us on Twitter. We'd love to get to know you.